Hello and welcome to On the Record. I'm Aldrin Sampier, sitting in for Vuyo Mvoko, who will be bringing us a special broadcast from Addis Ababa, where the African Union Summit is currently underway. But first, today's top stories. Today was the final day of the ANC's three-day ANC Lekgotla, and the ruling party held a media briefing on some of the discussion points from their session. Amongst them, it raised concerns on how the United States brought policy issues into the AGOA negotiations. ANC Secretary General Gwede Mantashe said policy issues had nothing to do with trade relations, and in fact, the U.S. is not South Africa's biggest trade partner.
The serious attempt by the U.S. to bring policy issues in the negotiations. BEE policies for South Africa, employment equity, the Act on Security, the amendment of the Act on Security and all those things have nothing to do with trade relations with the United States. Therefore, any effort of the United States to bring policy issues in the negotiation was actually bordering on being mischievous. But at the end of the day, that agreement is concluded now. It must be implemented. I don't think the implementation of it should be on the basis of the United States that if we don't have our chicken on shelves on date X, we may reconsider it. That approach will not work. And actually what we came to prove that the biggest economy of the world, the United States, is not our biggest trading partner, by the way. It's number 3. It's behind China, it's behind the EU.
Well, earlier today I was at the DA's March for Jobs, where concerns over the economy continue to be heightened. DA leader Musi Mamani told thousands of party faithful that the economy had failed to grow and create jobs. The opposition party lays the blame squarely at the doors of the ANC. The message high in the sky, and it has found resonance on the ground. A sea of blue. They want jobs.
The job is scarce, and a lot of youth are not working.
I'm unemployed now. I can't find a job. I have a degree. And there are so many people who are just like me, I've studied with.
We are young, we are old, we are black, we are white. We are together in this.
According to Stats SA, 5.4 million South Africans don't have jobs. The DA believes there are solutions. Stop red tape, fund small businesses, attract more direct foreign investments, but also give RDP homeowners title deeds so they have land as surety.
The current government does not have legitimacy in the economy. They can't lead the economy, and when you put a message about job creation, they come and break it down. And so they have lost because they don't have a plan around the economy. They are not coordinated.
My Mind is expected to release a fairness document, a plan on how the DA wants to even the playing field between black and white. Aldrin Sampier, SABC News, Johannesburg. The future of the Pan-African Congress of Azania hangs in the balance. The party runs the risk of not participating in the upcoming local government elections. The party has split into two factions since the expulsion of Letlapa Mphahlele as party leader in 2013. Despite numerous court actions, it appears there is no end in sight, and the IEC is not recognizing either side.
PAC, one of the country's oldest liberation parties, but its support has been declining post-apartheid, and now internal leadership battles threatens its participation in the coming elections. One faction says the IEC has refused to register its candidate for next month's Tlokwe by-elections.
The IEC has not banned the PAC, but it is preventing the PAC from participating in the electoral system and in the activities of the IEC. And we know very well that the elections in this country and elections there are not necessarily decided by voters. They are decided by those who count. They are decided by that system.
Moloto's faction says it has won all court challenges brought forward by Letlapa Mphahlele, making them the legitimate leadership. But Mphahlele is hearing none of it.
We went further to ask the elders of the PAC to reach out to the other structure so that they can bring us together. And actually we're prepared to go out of our way to keep PAC united.
Despite numerous attempts to reach the IEC, it was not available for a recorded comment. But the electoral body shunned the two factions of the PAC last year, arguing it did not know who to talk to. It also stopped funding the organization, saying it did not get involved in the internal battles. It remains to be seen if the warring factions will iron out their differences to contest what is expected to be a fierce local government elections. SABC News, Johannesburg.
A renewed fees must fall protest took center stage at Wits University today. Students are demanding that private security be removed. They claim that they feel threatened by the security presence hired by the university. The protest takes place with only a few days left for orientation week.
Yet another protest. This time, a ground shell movement at lunchtime. As members of the Fees Must Fall movement express their demands.
Private security is a display from management that they're not willing to engage with the Fees Must Fall movement in good faith. But specifically today, it's about demilitarizing campus and making sure that the environment is safe and conducive enough for students to come and run their daily errands as they try to register and prepare for orientation week.
But with the court interdict still active, students decided to embark on a more peaceful protest.
I just want to emphasize that, again, guys, the interdict still holds. And if there's anything we are going to do at this point that is going to violate it, it means that we are going to get arrested.
Not to be left out, workers added their voices to the concerns.
The securities are making the life of the students difficult here at campus, because every time they have to enter, especially this building, they have to produce their cards.
Management says allegations of assault are being investigated.
We accept that there must be engagement on all of these issues. The allegations of sexual harassment that are said to have been committed by any of the security forces or anyone for that matter, these are being investigated now by the Gender Equity Office.
The aim of the protest was to present management with a memorandum of demands by the Fees Must Fall movement. But in light of the altercations seen in the preceding days, management felt unsafe and decided not to go down to receive the memorandum. Despite this, the students say they are going to regroup and continue their peaceful demonstrations until their demands are met. Mariketa Mtlabe, SABC News, Johannesburg.
That's all the headline stories we have for you tonight. We now hand over to Vuyo, who brings us a special broadcast from the African Union Summit sitting in Ethiopia. From me, it's goodbye.
Step up, people of the party. We need your energy, your greatness. Just because you don't do it for money doesn't make you an amateur. Yes, we salute you, party comrade, with a bottle of Johnny Walker Red Label for just $169.99 from Tops at Spa.
New Castle Milk Stout Chocolate Infused. Savor the moment. The crafted chocolate stout made to be savored responsibly by people over the age of 18.
In Africa, technology has created many new ways of doing things.
ICT is an increasingly important part of everybody's life.
It's being used in education, for social media, and now for farming too.
The best thing about internet for a farmer is that you get to share information.
On Network, we give you all the important African technology and social media news. That's Network with me, Spumelele Zondi, every Sunday at 7:30 p.m. Central African Time, only on SABC News.
A very good evening and a warm welcome to this special broadcast brought to you by SABC News. Well, we're coming to you from the capital of Ethiopia, Addis Ababa, and that is where over the next 5 days, the leaders of the continent of Africa will be discussing a whole range of issues affecting the African continent this time around. Well, we begin with a conversation we had a couple of hours ago with AU chairperson Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma. Madam Chair, in your opening remarks this morning, you lamented the fact that in the past in the past year, there have been 10 elections on the continent, and they don't seem to have built upon what was already there in terms of empowering women.
Well, of course, there are many countries that are doing well in empowering women, but it can never be enough. And there are those who are slower, so we are all developing at different paces. But of course, nobody ever thought that the empowerment of women will happen overnight or just in 1 year. It's a process as long as we keep going forward. And we must try and accelerate it as much as we can. But yes, it's true that some countries are slower than others.
So you don't think it's a question of maybe people feeling, well, we've done enough, maybe we don't need to push any harder?
Well, I don't think they can say they've done enough, because it's clear that whether you take what was agreed in the UN or what has been agreed here, they haven't done enough. But what is more important is not really people thinking they are doing women a favor. It's not a favor. It is a prerequisite for transformation. And so countries that do not pay attention to the empowerment of women will actually never reach their full potential, and they will regret, because if you exclude other people, you're excluding talent, you're excluding energy, creativity. But also it's women's rights. It's their right to participate in all areas of human endeavor.
Now, another issue you obviously feel very strongly about, certainly from the speeches you made, but also a point you touched on today, was the silencing of guns. Given what is happening in South Sudan, in Somalia, in Burundi, in Libya, do you think the heads of state, when they gather here over the next few days, will be able to take some really tough resolutions which will ensure that guns are silenced in those parts of the continent?
Well, they took this decision in 2013 that they want to silence the guns by 2020. So it's important that they therefore take measures that will silence the guns. But if we see the conflicts that we have today, most of them are internal. We are not seeing any conflict in Africa where one country is fighting another. The problems are internal. And of course, there are issues around extremism and terrorism. So we need to look at the root causes of these conflicts and address them. Because if you think you can have peace and security only by deploying soldiers, it's not enough. Because to sustain peace and to have peace, you must also have development. Development is a prerequisite for peace, because people who are hungry, people who are homeless, one day they'll rise. And so it's important to look at the two and make sure that they go hand in hand.
Is it about that in South Sudan, for example?
Well, South Sudan is a very young country.
What do you think is the problem there?
If you look at it, first, there were no strong political institutions. Secondly, there were no strong government institutions. A dispute that was taking place within a party degenerated into war. But also, it's about resources as well, the control of resources. So, and also, it's about children going to school, it's about health services, it's about infrastructure, it's about all those things. But of course, if everybody feels that they are included and that the resources of the country are being used for the benefit of the people, then people will be more tolerant. So I think it's important. But South Sudan, the institutions are very important. Even now, they still need to build strong institutions, because there'll always be disagreements. There'll always be shocks in a country, but you need institutions that can absorb those shocks, that can deal with those disagreements without those disagreements degenerating into war.
Do you think we're anywhere near finding a solution to the South Sudan problems, with all the accompanying tragedies of like gang rapes, of like sexual slaves? Are we anywhere near resolving that question?
Well, I think it was important to reach some agreement. We are now hoping that the SPLM in opposition will come back to Juba. I'm told that the advance team has arrived, but the leadership must also arrive there. Because without a government, an inclusive government, it will be difficult to deal with all those things. You need a government that represents all the people. And of course, then they need to deal with those issues. But not only the government, society, faith-based leaders, traditional leaders, leaders of civil society must all deal with these problems. But that is the problem. Once there is war, then all the crimes that happen in communities but are then dealt with by law and order. When there is war, there is no law and order. So those things just happen in extreme circumstances. Because there is rape in society, but when there is war, it just becomes exaggerated. And so it's very important to get back to a government that can exercise law and order, communities that can look at their own laws in communities and their own leadership and their own activities.
What about Burundi? Are we on top of that situation?
Well, it's on the agenda of the heads of state. We'll see what they say.
But what is your reading of what could be the root causes of the situation we're seeing there?
Well, again, if you look at Burundi, this conflict is not new. It was resolved 10 years ago. There seemed to be a semblance of peace for 10 years, but clearly the fault lines that were there were not completely addressed. And as soon as there is a disagreement, you can see those fault lines widening. So it started with disagreements about whether there should be a third term or not. And then it's deteriorated into a conflict that is now claiming lives. on a daily basis, but also the violence is coming from both sides, from some groups and from government. So that was why the peace and security thought that there needs to be a stabilizing force that can assist both sides to stabilize the security situation there and protect the installations, the civilians, disarm those armed groups where they are found to be armed, and make sure that there are border patrols, because there are also claims that there are attacks that are coming across the border. So that stabilizing force can assist in doing all that together with the Burundians themselves.
Well, the Burundi government seems to be rejecting the idea out of hand.
Well, we'll see. There's a meeting of heads of state. We'll see what they say, and we'll see what Burundi says. But obviously, it's clear that they need assistance.
Lastly, Madam Chair, the African Union becoming self-reliant and being able to fund its own programs, being able to really do what it wants to do without feeling the pressure of some outside funder or donor. Are we anywhere near achieving that goal?
Well, that goal is not a goal that can be achieved overnight, but I think we have moved from where we were, in the sense that before it was accepted that the member states will pay for operational, donors will pay for programs and peace and security. But it is now accepted that we must move away from that we must begin to put money gradually into peace and security and fund at least 25% of the operations over time.
So the targets have been revised?
Yes, because, I mean, peace and security is the primary responsibility of the Security Council. So that's why it's 25% rather than 100%, because the primary responsibility lies elsewhere. And we contribute to the United Nations. It's not that member states don't contribute there. Secondly, it has also been agreed that 75% of programs must be paid by member states, and that must come in gradually. And that's why there is a discussion about, if countries cannot get that from the fiscus, what are the alternate ways through which they can raise those resources? So I would say yes, we've moved, because before it was just a matter of fact that that's how it is. But the fact that heads of state have said, they've deliberated, the ministers of finance have said, and they are the ones who came with these revised targets. So yes, there's movement, but it's not something that can be solved overnight, but there's movement.
Madam Chair, best of luck and happy birthday to you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, after the break, we're in conversation with the Commissioner of the African Union responsible for economic development. Where is this continent going? Does it have what it takes to build itself up and create a better future for all Africans? That's after this short ad break.
As stories are broken around the world, SABC makes sure you do not miss out. As the stories unfold throughout the day, News at 8 updates all newsworthy stories worldwide. Globally, we are there. Locally, we leave no story untold. Make a date with news at 8 every Saturday and Sunday on SABC News, Africa's news leader. Children's rights and health are a priority in the journey of good health.
All children should have access to adequate health care, not only curative but preventative as well.
How to identify ADHD on children.
ADHD is a childhood disorder which manifests with the symptoms of hyperactivity, impulsivity, and or inattention.
Is breastfeeding still a vital nutrition to babies even today?
Breastfeeding for the first 6 months of life is absolutely crucial.
Catch Health Talk with Dr. Sello Mutawung every Saturday from 9 till 10 a.m.
Welcome back. You're watching on the record, and tonight we're coming to you from Addis Ababa in Ethiopia, and that is where leaders of the African Union are meeting over the next 5 days to discuss the future of this continent. Now, earlier in the day, the commissioner responsible for economic development on the continent, Dr. Anthony Maruping, held a briefing at which he told the story of where things are, how we've, the sort of things that we've done over the past year, and what it is that the Commission is doing to take Africa forward in the next year and over the next few years. Well, I caught up with him after that briefing and began by asking him whether, in fact, some of the comments that he made at that briefing are not pouring cold water to some of the good work that he said has already been done.
It's not permanent. It's a temporary setback because of that fall in commodities prices and demand for Africa's exports. There has always been ups and downs like that. But that's precisely the point. We have to move our economies from dependence on commodities, because there has always been commodities boom and bust. When commodities are good, our economies do well, and when commodities prices go down, they also bust. But also, it's a bit of a fluke, because at the time when we say they are doing well, in as long as we depend on export of raw materials as they are without any value addition, what happens is that actually the firms or the companies that are in extractive industry are predominantly foreign. And when they have exported and have had their earnings, those earnings are repatriated to their... So really, it's always only a small part that benefits our economy, even during that boom. So if we now transform our economies such that we can add value, then we will be creating jobs at every step of beneficiation, every level of beneficiation.
But does the continent have what it takes to do that? Can we move fast enough, for example, around beneficiation?
Yes, that's why we were saying the first thing to do now is to manage the situation very well. You know, fiscal and monetary policy, macroeconomic and financial management, in addition to humanitarian interventions. But that's immediate. In the meantime now, we have to embrace Agenda 2063, because Agenda 2063 has all that, you know, improvement in productive capacities, diversification, which makes the economy resilient both to internal and external shocks, and that value addition now which creates jobs at every stage of production, and includes more people and tackles poverty. All that is in Agenda 2063, and accelerated integration. When it's integrated, it becomes more attractive to investors because it's a larger market and it allows optimal distribution of factors of production.
Now, apart from these, external forces, there are things that are within our means to actually control and deal with. The gun is not silent yet, in places like Somalia, in places like South Sudan, in places like Burundi, in places like Libya. How do we deal with those situations and give them the urgency that they deserve?
Peace and security is totally devoted to this, to make sure that we do move towards silencing the guns. But another approach, because it's egg and hen, because there is poverty, there is conflict, and because there is conflict, there is no development, there is more poverty, and it goes on and on. It's like a whirlpool throwing us down. So somewhere this has to be cut, and one way of cutting it is to accelerate development. That is why there is what is called the Great Lakes Region Initiative, which includes 13 countries around the Great Lakes of Africa, well, plus South Africa, because of primarily the Great Inga Dam. They will be buying power from there. There is also Horn of Africa initiative, and there is Sahel initiative, and there is now in the offing Chad Basin initiative. All this initiative is to try to break that egg and hen situation of poverty, conflict, more poverty.
Now, from comments made by some of the heads of state, among them President Jacob Zuma, as he was returning from Davos, the heads of state that are going to meet here over the next few days need to make integration their priority. He highlighted the fact that 3 regions are already together to a very large extent, and the need for the rest of the regions to come on board. If you were to tell these, if you were to advise these heads of state to look at one matter urgently and resolve it here at the summit, what would that one big issue be?
To me, one big issue would be embrace and start implementing Agenda 2063, the first 10-year implementation plan, because that's Africa's blueprint out of the quagmire in which we find ourselves now. And it includes precisely that, because one of the fast-track projects of the first 10-year plan is a continental free trade area, which is exactly what you have just addressed. There is commodity strategy, which is that beneficiation and value addition and industrialization in Africa. We have transport networks like train network, e-network, energy generation. Some are enablers, some are already, a move on the development front already in themselves. There are many of them, about 12 of them. So if we embrace Agenda 2063 first 10-year implementation plan and the 12 fast-track or flagship projects, we are on our way out of this, and we must be determined.
Lastly, and very briefly, Commissioner, looking at just how foreign direct investment has gone down across the continent, do you think Africa has gone out of fashion? as an investment destination?
You know what is interesting is that intra-Africa investment, cross-border investment, has gone up tremendously, and it is going up.
But can it replace foreign direct investment?
And that is why we are moving to, we want to, because that came from the investors actually and business people, about free movement, because they were saying we want to go across and make deals. Now I have to wait for the visa and all that, and okay, can we move and make deals? So we think that will help. And the former president of the African Development Bank, Donald Kaberuga, used to tell us that it's not the funding that is lacking. What is lacking is that we don't move our projects to the bankable blueprint level. We leave them at the level of an idea, a good idea. And it takes money to move a good idea to a blueprint, to really bankable stage. And that is what is necessary. So that's why African Development Bank has Agenda 50. And even the new president has assured us that funding is there. We can mobilize, and that we have a lot of development banks.
It's time to take another quick ad break. Don't go away.
SABC News. We report, contextualize and present news and current affairs honestly, fairly and fully. We consider it a duty to provide consistent, relevant, useful and top quality information and analysis. Our mission is to provide credible, accurate and interesting news programming, bringing news into everyone's homes in everyone's languages. Thank you, South Africa, for relying on SABC News for quality news output and for making us your #1 source of information. SABC News, Africa's news leader.
We kick off this week's show by seeing how Kenyans are paying tribute to the victims, as well as not only how they've coped, but how they returned stronger after the attacks.
Last year, images of the 4-day Westgate Mall attack saturated front pages.
In the Democratic Republic of Congo, artists have assembled to celebrate the peace this war-torn country has not had in a long time.
No conflict that can't be solved without a conversation.
The Journal, every Saturday at 1:30 on SABC News.
Welcome back. You're watching On the Record. Tonight coming to you from the Ethiopian capital of Addis Ababa. Well, Team South Africa is here in large numbers. They are led by the minister responsible for international cooperation, Maite Ngwana Mashabane. I caught up with her earlier in the day and began by asking her what it is exactly that Team South Africa is putting on the table this time around.
We have turned the vision into Agenda Africa. In South Africa, we went into the adoption of the first 10-year implementation plan of this Agenda Africa 2063, which focuses on the 7 aspirations of the AU, amongst them being silencing the gun by 2020, that there should be peace and security and development on the continent. We don't have a choice to do one and the other will come later, but both.
The question of silencing the guns. The guns are still not silent. in Somalia. The guns are still not silent in South Sudan. The question is, what are we going to do differently this time, or what will this summit do differently to what we've done before?
Well, we've done things differently before and not so long ago. That is when the whole world had forgotten about Somalia and had declared Somalia a failed state. It took Africans to bring about, if you like, the renaissance of Somalia. We are dealing with this very painful but sporadic attacks, which happened largely much more in the Middle East than it does in Somalia. The determination of working with the people of Somalia, and thanks to the support and the volunteerism of countries like Burundi, Uganda, Kenya, and others, that we are not giving up. Somalia is not going back to the ruins. It's never going to be a failed state again. I think that's a matter we should celebrate, because this sporadic incidents of explosion of bombs happens in Paris, happened everywhere else, but of course nobody declares them failed states. They resolve to continue keeping on. So South Sudan, they are very few, as you know, our deputy president has been appointed by our president to be our special envoy as per the invitation of South Sudanese. There are very few disagreements on moving on. So I think the determination there also to move on is much greater today than it was yesterday. Largely, Vuyo, you and I are sitting here out of 54 states of our continent. We are now just pointing at a few. Years ago, 50 years ago, you would be referring to not 50, but half of that. Half the countries were run by men, not women, men in uniform. That is a thing of the past. So we have made tremendous progress, and we are confident that it is not impossible for us to silence the gun by 2020. But also, those who see us as a market to sell their toys, to keep us killing each other, need to slow down. And I think we'll have to start naming names as time goes on.
The process that's supposed to be led by Uganda is anything to go by. We are not making as much progress with regard to Burundi. Your sense?
Our sense is that we will make progress because there's willingness from the government, and Burundi, as I was leaving the hall now, is a subject of the Permanent Representative Council, who are reporting to us about their work. And we've been having engagements with Burundi together with the chair of the East African Community, the new Honorable Minister Mahiga. We've had a conversation with him right now. They visited us during the holidays to say, by the way, the peace that prevailed in Uganda didn't just come by. It was led by Nyerere, led by our father of the nation, Madiba, who handed over to President Zuma, who was deputy president then. They are now re-inviting us, as much as we are not members of the East African Community, to work with them. And we found that to be very encouraging.
What is it exactly that they are asking South Africa to do?
To support the dialogue process. From the AU side, there are also initiatives that which will make sure that peace prevails, that there are no sporadic incidents that happen largely during the night with some faceless people who makes it difficult for them to move on.
And South Africa is being roped in not because of maybe the tensions within the East Africa community itself, which are making it, well, nearly impossible for that mediation effort led by Uganda to actually work. Is that not the reason?
No. President Zuma has worked with President Museveni in the past, and currently there is a consonant that we should again work together even in this. And President Zuma was very clear that we've never gone to any region self-invite. No.
Let's move on to infrastructure, Minister, which he said was also one of the key areas that are going to, this summit is going to focus on, and with President Zuma, of course, being the champion of the continent's infrastructure program. In your report back, what is South Africa going to be saying to this summit?
We will be saying that when we went to Sandton Media, we were still talking about identification of the projects. Now there's agreement that we need a speed train across the continent. And I'm happy to report to you, and I'm sure you'll hear that from the chairperson herself, that this pre-feasibility studies and studies, we are almost finishing that, of making sure that Africans who cannot fly can also ride by train from one place to the next. Because it's one thing to say we want free movement of goods and services, but if transporting cattle from Uganda to Kenya takes 2 weeks, it means that there's a lot that needs to be done on infrastructure connectivity. So the speed train is going on, project is going on well. We're working in partnership with China, and China announced in your presence, I guess, 300 billion on supporting Africa on this infrastructure project.
Lastly, Minister, I've got to release you. The chairperson of the AU in her opening remarks lamented the fact that there seems to be something that could be read as a regression in so far as the advancement of women in politics on the continent, citing the past 8 elections where there didn't seem to be much movement in advancing women. Your thoughts?
My thought is, and I've shared this with her, before the OAU was formed, there was a Pan-African Women's Organization. This is our history. It was formed on the 31st of July in Tanzania. Remember the Freedom Charter of South Africa? The women started it. In 1954, women had a women's charter. So we never give up. She lamented that because she wanted to raise our awareness that power is not a bag of oranges. We are going to have to stand up. As I said, I have now learned that patriarchy is not an African thing only. It's all over the world. When people talk leadership, they think men. But we've seen progress here in the continent where men and women work in partnership.
It's time to take another quick ad break. Don't go away.
For victory requires intense effort and teamwork. When you get to it, there is no turning back, because all eyes are on you. When it's action time, nothing should stand in your way. Sports Live tackles and analyzes all the sports action. This is the home of all your sport news, updates, and more. Sports Live weekdays at 8:30 p.m.
The big news is Newsroom.
We also stream live on YouTube.
Whether you're at home, at the office, or at the gym, wherever you are, Newsroom is right there with you. Bringing you all the latest news, updates, sports, weather, and everything in between. Get all the latest news you need on the go via live streaming on our YouTube channel. That's Newsroom, weekdays at 9 a.m. only on the SABC News Channel.
We kick off this week's show by seeing how Kenyans are paying tribute to the victims, as well as not only how they've coped, but how they returned stronger after the attacks.
Last year, images of the 4-day Westgate Mall attack saturated front pages.
In the Democratic Republic of Congo, artists have assembled to celebrate the peace this war-torn country has not had in a long time.
No conflict that can't be solved without a conversation.
The Journal, every Saturday at 1:30 on SABC News.
One man has taken it upon himself to walk the corridors of this building, that is the headquarters of the African Union, trying to convince politicians, business people, civil society to listen to his plea. And his plea is that the film industry is there to be used by civil society, by the business community, by the politicians to drive the message of growth and development on this continent.
The film is very important for the education, for the social affairs, and economically. Now it's sure, absolutely sure, in many countries in Africa, film is an industry, and he could bring jobs. Now with the film industry we have 5 million jobs in the continent, and the film bring in our economy more than 4 billion of US dollar, perhaps more, because we have problem of statistic. But the most important thing is film can educate your youth, because it's the future of Africa. Now, what we observe? You observe youth see only movies coming from other countries. It's not bad, but unfortunately, the images they receive in the TV is about crime, sex, corruption, violence. Africa, we want to show our values, our way of life about tolerance, development, courage, solidarity, and love.
But how will film do that differently from the way politicians, for example, go about doing what they do?
The politicians don't arrive to understand the importance of film and culture, because they say culture is only to enjoy people. They don't see the culture is exactly to educate, to bring understanding of each question of the world. Our communities, human communities, each human community utilize the values and the technique from the culture to organize their society and to develop for a best human being. They forgot that without culture we can't do anything. And today, you look at in the world, in the United States, the second best industry in the United States is the cultural industries after the industries of military industries. That's real. But in fact, too, the culture can bring the possibility to inform, to educate, because now and in 2063, we want to bring this possibility to develop. It's our challenge, film industry, because we arrive to educate youth, but to bring a big industry for for money, for job, etc., etc. Politicians have to understand that, because the hegemony for the communication, if Africa has not a place in the hegemony of the communication, it's a big loss for our continent.
Now, you've been, working throughout these corridors, and you've been trying to lobby the politicians and their bureaucrats to listen to you. Do you get a sense that they're getting the message? Are they reacting positively to the things that you are saying and you are tabling before them?
Yes, I hope, because our challenge is to promote and develop the film industry. And in 2003, in Maputo, the Executive Council accept a decision to create a commission, audiovisual, African commission for cinema and audiovisual, and to create fund to promote the filmmaking. In 2003, the Secretary Executive of FEPAC in Kenya and we work with the Commission of Social Affairs to elaborate a study about African cinema and to elaborate the statutes of these two institutions. And we bring these two institutions by Kenya government because we're sure if we arrive to be effective, these two institutions, it's a big step for us. And I am sure the politicians, we discuss with them. If it's not at this summit, I'm sure it will be at Kigali. At Kigali, they are ready now to help us, and we have with us a country like Kenya who is ready to support us, and I'm sure it will be a big thing.
Well, that's our program for this evening. Do join us again tomorrow evening, same time. From me and the rest of the crew here in Addis Ababa, it's a good night.
I'm Peter Ndoro.
And I'm Babakini Chetty Miller, SAB Miller, and Hauser-Busch InBev. It's something that I need to learn to say more often.
Will together produce around a third of the world's beer.
It is a mouthful.
Have you ever considered skin bleaching?
Nigeria tops the list of African countries with 77% of its women bleaching their skin.
Now I can see that it is not good because it affects my face and some of my body parts.
Thousands of Arab Israelis and Palestinians participated in a big rally. Flight MH17 was shot down by a Russian-made missile.
How those chips may fall is a prediction best left to the currency of time.
That's Primetime News, Africa Journal, and Your World on SABC News.
As stories are broken around the world, SABC makes sure you do not miss out. As the stories unfold throughout the day, News at 8 updates all newsworthy stories worldwide. Globally, we are there. Locally, we leave no story untold. Make a date with News at 8 every Saturday and Sunday on SABC News, Africa's news leader.
and welcome to the first hour of Your World on SABC News Channel 404. I'm Tabile Ngwato.
And I'm Lulu Gabu. Thank you for joining us. Let's take a look at stories making headlines at this hour.
The African Union's Executive Council of Ministers highlights growing concerns regarding conflicts in South Sudan, Somalia and Burundi.
Kenyan and Nigerian presidents have vowed to continue to fight terrorism in Somalia. The two heads of state attended a memorial service for over 100 Kenyan soldiers killed by Al-Shabaab.
And in our last headline, an International Labour Organization report points to job losses and casualization of agricultural workers in South Africa over the past 20 years.
African leaders have begun taking a hard look at the challenges facing the continent, and the situation is not a particularly pleasing one. African Union Chair Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma has warned that resolving Africa's challenges is going to take more than lip service.
She was speaking during the opening of the African Union Executive Council of Ministers meeting in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia.
The highest level gathering of government ministers, second only to that of their political principals, the heads of state summit scheduled to begin in 2 days' time. Opening the African Union Executive Council of Ministers meeting, AU Chair Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma warned that resolving Africa's challenges is going to take more than lip service.
We are but 4 years away from our target year to silence the guns and end the suffering of women, men and children in the few countries still plagued by conflict and in the regions facing the threats of terrorism and violent extremism. We must not be deterred from our goal of bringing about peace. The peoples of Mali, South Sudan, Darfur, Libya, Somalia, others can live in peace and harmony and can join the march towards the Africa we want.
Dlamini-Zuma also lamented what appears to be a regression in the empowerment of women in Africa's politics.
In the more than 10 elections held last year, only Ethiopia and Sudan managed to increase the percentage of women in parliamentary sufficient to make it into the group of countries with more than 30% women in parliament. We must do better in the 2016 elections.
Terrorism, a scourge threatening to destabilize the continent thought to be well on its way to prosperity, is also receiving attention.
Do we recognize on what we call terrorists, be it Al-Shabaab, Boko Haram, or those who perpetrate the carnages in Central African Republic or South Sudan, a similar rule booking, killing without remorse, doing it like a job, better than planting or surviving in the periphery, and then have a good drink and laugh at the panic provoked and media attention. How can this happen? How can this continue to happen?
Several other issues are also on the agenda of the two-day ministers' meeting, including the conflicts raging in countries like South Sudan, Somalia and Burundi.
The renewed military clashes in Sudan are stalling the progress for peace in Sudan. A top UN peacekeeping official has told the Security Council that progress to resolve the conflict in Darfur through dialogue remains fragmented.
Hervé Lassous, the Under-Secretary General for Peacekeeping Operations, was addressing members in New York.
The political process to resolve the conflict through dialogue remains fragmented and progress thus far limited. Major armed movements and opposition parties continue to boycott the current national dialogue framework.
The Darfur conflict began in 2003 when mainly non-Arab tribes took up arms against the Arab-led government in Khartoum, accusing it of discrimination. The mass killings of a decade ago have eased, but the insurgency continues. And Khartoum has kept up attacks on rebel groups, leaving many living in limbo in harsh conditions.
We do not agree on what he said for three basic reasons. First, his interpretations of the facts in Jebel Mara as well as in terms of cooperation with the mission in terms of granting visas.
Khartoum has been accused of mobilizing proxy Arab militia to help quell the revolt. Some militia men known locally as Janjaweed pillaged and burned villages and killed civilians. The government has called the Janjaweed outlaws and denied supporting them.
Let me close, Mr. President, by reiterating my concern about the impact of the renewed upsurge in fighting on the civilian population in Jebel Mara. And let me express my hope that the cessation of hostilities negotiations, with the participation of all the non-signatory movements, including Abdul Wahid Noor, that this will come to a positive conclusion and bring to an end the suffering of a population which is caught up in the fighting between the government and rebel forces.
UN figures show that almost 500,000 people were displaced in 2014 alone, the highest annual total since the height of conflict in 2004. The UN says about 4.4 million people need humanitarian assistance in Darfur, and more than 2.5 million remain displaced. A joint African Union United Nations peacekeeping mission deployed in 2007 remains in the country to protect civilians and ensure aid delivery in the region.
President Uhuru Kenyatta of Kenya, Muhammadu Buhari of Nigeria, and his son Sheikh Mahmoud of Somalia have paid tribute to Kenyan defense soldiers who died over a week ago in Somalia. The three heads of state laid wreaths at a fallen heroes monument at the Eldoret barracks in the west of the country before attending an interdenominational service. The service came a day after Kenyan troops in Somalia moved their bases near the Kenyan border. An unknown number of Kenyan soldiers assigned to the African Union mission in Somalia, AMISOM, were killed when Al-Shabaab militants overran their camp in El Ade, south